Good morning, good afternoon, or maybe even good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Timothy Jones. I am IT Help Desk staff at SUNY Buffalo State College and one of their IT trainers on campus. And this morning we're going to go over a brief PowerPoint workshop about adding narration and automatic timing to your PowerPoint slideshows. Starting right from the top, what we've realized over time is that for most users, the most difficult part for them about using the audio and timing recording tool is just knowing it's there in the first place. So by default, just be aware, recording won't show up in the interface. And you can add it a couple different ways. One is to use the search tool in the center top of the screen, or you can add it as a ribbon under your main tabs. To add it to main tabs, just real quick, we'll touch on this in the live session, but just be aware it's in File, Options, and Customize Ribbon. And to get to that same place, you can also right-click on any of the tab names and choose Customize the Ribbon. And that'll pull up a screen where you'll basically be check-marking a recording option under Main tabs. To show what that actually looks like in the wild, you can go to Click, and we're going to right-click here, Customize the Ribbon, and that pulls up the PowerPoint Options panel. I'm going to resize that real quick. And on the right-hand side here, this Main tabs, we're just going to scroll down, and you'll see this recording option. We're going to click there once to check mark it and click OK to lock that in. And you'll now see that we have this recording tab up at the very top of our interface. Now, in addition to that, it can also be added as a quick access toolbar button. Depending on your setup and depending on your preferences, this may even be the ideal way to do it, but let's bring us back. We're going to click on the search bar and start typing in the word record. Under Actions, that'll bring up Record Slideshow, and you can right-click here, and that will give us this option to add to the Quick Access toolbar. Move the cursor over, and we've got this new button right here, which lets us basically add narrations from the current slide we're on. Now, to touch on some of the basics. Only the desktop versions of PowerPoint support recording audio narration. And basically this means if you're using the web browser version of it, like Google Chrome or Safari, you won't be able to bring up this feature even if you use some of the steps we went through to add it in the previous slide. It's unfortunately just not available. And the second is just be aware that external cameras and external microphones, when they're available to you, can give better results if you're not happy with the quality of built-in options. And I especially point this out for users who are using touchscreen devices and relying on either the touchscreen interface or maybe even styluses or touchscreen pens. Because when you're touching the screen or running the stylus over the screen, you'll often hear kind of a popping or a grinding noise that gets picked up by the microphone. And users, it can be very distracting for them on the far end. And you can avoid that if you're using an external microphone, for example. And lastly, you can record narrations and timing on both Windows and Mac. That's just kind of the standard feature of the desktop version of PowerPoint. But exporting as video, which is something we'll touch on a little bit later, is limited to the Windows version. That shouldn't affect your overall workflow because you will be able to take your finalized file. You know, your workflow will be exactly what it would be normally, but once you're done with that file and ready to turn it into a video file as a secondary option, you'll just want to bring that file to a Windows computer or maybe track down a Windows user that you can send that file to. They'll basically export it from there, and you'll then have access to both. Now, you have a couple different options when you're sharing completed presentations. The first of these is kind of the tried and true, most basic, and that's sharing your finalized PowerPoint file and distributing it normally as an attachment or an additional file alongside your course. This would be either a PPT or a PPTX file. And the main limitation of this is just knowing that users on the receiving end need to have PowerPoint software for playback to be able to take advantage of that file. Now, secondly is in Windows, you can use the Save As feature to create a separate video file. And this has the advantage of basically anyone can view it. You don't need that locally installed version of PowerPoint to play it back. But something I always mention, just because occasionally it comes up, is that these video files cannot be edited. And that has the advantage if you want to limit what users are able to do with your shared file. But it also means don't rely on the video file to keep your presentation if you plan to be editing later. You always want to keep your original PowerPoint file and your video file if you do produce that. Now, how this looks in the wild for saving to video, you're basically just clicking on the file, going to Save As, and we have our file name up here, but right below that is our format. And by default, it's in PPTX. We're going to click and scroll down to MPEG for video. And that's the format we want. Now I'm gonna pause the video right here. You would click Save. Something when you're producing video, when you're using the Save As MPEG-4 video, PowerPoint needs a little extra time to process, to what's called render your video. So you'll notice, actually very similar to what you might see in Microsoft Outlook. At the bottom of the screen, after we click the Save button, there will be a light gray progress bar, and that'll show how far along it is in actually saving the video. So just be aware it'll take a little bit of time unless it's a very short presentation, and you'll want to kind of leave the computer alone to do its business there. You don't want to immediately close PowerPoint because that'll actually interrupt that saving process. And it's just something to keep in mind, nothing to particularly worry about. And lastly, I almost forgot about this. Something I want to point out is about file sizes. So we have here the PowerPoint file. It's only 440 kilobytes. And above that is our video file. And that's the recorded version, not editable, but anyone can view it. That's 17 megabytes. And that's not huge. So it's still pretty easy to distribute that more generally. But if you have a longer presentation, if you have a longer lecture, that file size might get seemingly inordinately large. So just be aware that you might need to be sharing that video file as a video link to something like your OneDrive, or you may even want to upload it onto a sharing service like YouTube or whatever you use to distribute through your institution. And that being mentioned, our third option is you can stream your presentation on quote-unquote live instructional platforms like Collaborate. And this is nice because you're not worrying about your presentation. You're having this kind of pre-recorded version of your presentation that students or audiences are able to see and respond to, and that gives you a little more focus to respond to their reactions and react and take part in chat a little more directly, kind of while that runs in the background. By the same token, you can take these completed video files and, as I said before, share them on something like YouTube that makes it a little easier to have kind of an asynchronous teaching environment where the student doesn't have to be there at that exact moment. You know, they can do it on their own time. They can do it on their own schedule. They can do it when they have access to a computer, which is something that's been kind of increasing concern recently. A couple of common snags that you might run into that are worth pointing out. The first of these is just be aware that audio doesn't record between slides. So you'll want to work in kind of a brief pause in your delivery after you finish each page. Otherwise, you'll end up with this little gap in your sentence that can be pretty distracting to users. This doesn't apply to the actual animations within a slide, but just if you're going, for example, from slide 5 to slide 6. Just give yourself that brief pause and kind of take that into account while you're giving your sentence. Next is kind of a best practice is I always recommend using a test slide right at the start of your session to be sure your audio sounds right. So record a little bit, go ahead and stop, step back and play it back. Make sure your audio sounds like you expect it to do. You need to protect and respect your prep time. I've run into users every now and then who beautiful orators and gave a particularly great presentation, and unfortunately the microphone was muted on the wire coming from their computer. And they didn't realize it, so they just ended up with this slideshow with timings all, set up in advance, but no audio recorded at all. And that can be a huge frustration if it catches you, and it can be incredibly demoralizing. So it's something to just be aware of and be thoughtful of when you're starting off each recording session. And lastly, if users are seeing your PowerPoint files with a web viewer, so they're using the web version of PowerPoint to play back your PowerPoint presentations, just be aware that they won't see all of the animation and transition effects. This is something that in the official Microsoft support documentation, they'll give you the individual effects that do work. They're basically the more straightforward or simple ones. You might want to kind of leverage those more heavily if you're in an environment where students are relying on the web viewer. And this is actually kind of a pitch for saving as a video because this avoids that shortcoming. When you're rendering that video, you're capturing everything that you can see on your end, and they'll be seeing it exactly as you were. And a few quality of life features worth mentioning. So these are kind of positives that we have to look forward to. You can record and re-record slides individually or just do one full read-through. And if you do it as a full read-through, there's no problem with going back and re-recording an individual slide if maybe the dog barked or maybe you had to cough or lost your train of thought halfway through. It's very simple to go through and do that. And similarly, if you're going to be kind of iterating on your PowerPoints over time, already recorded slides can be easily reordered in the main edit view. It's just kind of dragging and dropping like you would normally do, and it brings along those recorded timings and your audio file as well. So like if you realize, hey, this piece of information would be much better served earlier in the presentation, it's very simple to do that. And to see it in the wild, we're in our edit view, you just click and hold and then slide it up and down. And whenever you're ready to drop it where you want to leave it, you just release that click button. There's no extra challenge to doing this. It's just kind of know that those pre-recorded narrations and transitions and animation timings, those are all included on the slide as normal. And lastly, when you record an audio clip, animation and transition timing is automatically captured. This isn't a separate action you're having to do aside from just progressing your show normally as you talk. As I said before, that's just, they live on the slide as soon as you're done with it. They can be edited or moved around individually, and it gives you a lot of flexibility and very granular control over the show, especially if, for example, if you're iterating your show semester to semester, it can be easy to go back in and revise information if new information comes out or correct issues that students point out or maybe that you catch later on. And with all that being said, let's take a moment and give me just 1 second to change my microphone, but we're going to jump over into our live demo. So now let's jump into a little bit of a live demo with kind of a blank canvas in terms of PowerPoint as it would look before we've added any of these buttons. So it's you coming in the first time and you want to basically activate the feature as far as you seeing it in the menus. So real quick, I'll point out in this upper left area here, this is our kind of quick ribbon area. There's some buttons you can add in there. Like for example, I have the undo and repeat buttons. I have the save button for when I'm manually saving. These are ones you can kind of toggle on and off as an option to just have as a background feature. So I'm going to click into the Microsoft search real quick. And I'll start typing in record, and under actions that'll bring up record slideshow. Now clicking that would bring up the record slideshow feature, but for us here we just actually want to right click it and we're going to add to quick access toolbar. And now you'll notice we have this little extra button here, and that'll let us record the slideshow. Pressing this is the same as activating it anywhere, so let's jump in real quick. And you'll see we have the feature here. That's theoretically all you need to do to add it. I'm going to hit escape to back out real quick, but I'm going to show you how to add it also onto your main tabs here. This is all down to personal preference. I only basically need the record from current slide button. I like having that in there, but there are a few more options when you add it into your main tab here. So let's start with actually the long way to add it. This one's a little more foolproof. So we're going to go over to the left to the File button. I'm going to click that once. We're going to go down to Options. I'm going to click that once. And this now pulls up our PowerPoint options. And we're going to go into the Customize Ribbon area. And customize the ribbon main tabs. Let's just make sure we're there. I'm going to scroll down, and we've got this checkbox here, which will let us add for recording. And you click OK to lock that in. Now I'm actually not going to add it quite yet because I'm going to show you a second way to do it. So I'm going to unclick that so we don't expect recording to show up, but we're going to click OK. So now that you know that's there, this main tabs, you can also right click on any of these titles to get to that exact same place. So I'm going to right click on home. We don't have to right click on home. We could right click on animations and it will show you customize the ribbon. That'll get us right back where we were. We're already scrolled down actually. We're going to click that check mark box and click OK to lock it in. So now you'll notice we have record living on our main tabs. and you've got this record slideshow button that's the same as you would have if you clicked this button here. You've got a couple extra options which might be useful depending on your setup. And you'll also notice this save as show or export to video. These are kind of a quick access version of the save as feature and setting it to MPEG video that we highlighted a little earlier. So again, if you're planning on exporting to video, it might be good to add it to your overall main tabs. Now, the reason I highlight that kind of foolproof way first, where you're actually going to File and then down to Options, the reason I show that first is because when you right-click in the main tab buttons, for one, if you right-click on an empty area, it doesn't actually give you the right feature. So it shows here if we right-click, but if I right-click in this empty space, you just get some nonsense. That can be a little confusing. As well as when you right-click on any of these, it shows customize the ribbon and collapse the ribbon. And when you're looking at a glance, those can look pretty similar. And if you accidentally click collapse the ribbon, I've seen a lot of people do this, and they're suddenly in a panic because all their tools appear to be missing. And unless you know to go ahead and click into this to bring them back up, they're lost for a little bit. And in addition to that, unless you know to go to the right over here and pin the ribbon, you wouldn't know how to get your tools back to how they were originally. So just be aware that that's something that can happen when you're setting this up if you choose the wrong option. But remember, you can either add the entire recording tab here, or if you don't want to use quite that much real estate, you can always add it to the quick access button up here. So let's go ahead in and basically show the tools for recording a slideshow. So I'm just going to click that, and that brings us into the record narration interface. Now let's show us our polar north. We've got a record button up in the left-hand corner. If you click that, it gives you a little 3-second countdown, and then you're able to, assuming you have a microphone hooked up, it'll let you record your narration. It'll let you'll actually be progressing it manually like you did with a normal slideshow, so using the arrow key or the spacebar key to continue. It will show you which slide you're on down here. And the way it works is you can either, start on the first slide, hit record to begin, and then keep talking all the way through. Like I mentioned before, when you're between slides, not the animations on a slide, but between slides, you'll want to give yourself a little breathing room and have a moment without any audio recorded, because it won't record during that moment. That being said, in the bottom right here, you'll see the toggle for your microphone itself. It's just a simple left click to toggle it. And if you have a camera set up, you might have actually noticed that it's showing up down in the corner like that. You got my goofy face in there. Let's turn that off immediately. Yeah, if your camera shows up before you're recording, you'll maybe want to either choose to have that active or choose to toggle that off. Once you have some narration and timing recorded, you'll be able to jump into any of these that have audio on them. And up here, you have this clear option. So let's say you were doing a dry run and you just want to get rid of the audio on a particular tab and start fresh. You can go to clear and clear recordings on current slide. I don't have recordings on this slide. That's why it's grayed out. Or let's say you weren't happy with any of the audio from your current run. You can go up to clear and choose clear recording on all slides. You have either of those options. In addition to that, you are able to add manual highlights. So you can highlight like that. It'll just fill in any white space. Or you can use the actual pen tool to go in and, let's say, highlight or emphasize something, circle something, cross something out. Those options are all there. And while you're on the same slide, you still have the ability to go into the eraser tool and actually just clear those out. I think that's most of what you need to know with this. Play around with it. You do get used to it. Eventually, it becomes a very powerful tool in the sense that you're able to kind of go in with your best reading, but let's say one particular slide or one particular moment you had a baby crying in the background, or you had, you stuttered, or you kind of slurred your words and you're aware of it. You can just go in individually, choose that specific slide, and just clear and then redo that recording. And when you're doing an individual slide recording, like you've started on slide number 4, and there is audio after it, it won't automatically go on to the next slide. You won't have to worry about re-recording that unless you choose to continue recording at that point. So, yeah, thank you for your time. I'm hoping this was helpful for people. I guess I'll highlight one last time. When you're in this recording interface, you just hit the escape button to jump out. And that brings us back to our slide wherever we were. And yeah, my name is Tim from the IT Help Desk at Buffalo State College. If you have any questions or feedback for us, you can get in touch with us at ithelpdesk@buffalostate.edu. Have a good day.